People don't always destroy you with cruelty. Sometimes they do it with condescension. With smirks. With offhand remarks that sound like nothing but cut like everything. My story begins with one sentence. One sentence delivered with a smile so smug it still lives in my bones. You're too young to matter here, Avery. My aunt said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. My cousin snickered. My mother said nothing. And my uncle? He didn't even look up from his spreadsheet. That sentence cemented my place at the family table, the quiet end, the insignificant end, the end reserved for people who weren't meant to have opinions. The table where people like me were supposed to sit and listen. We were gathered at my grandfather's house for what my family called preliminary discussions. An arrogant phrase, really. Because they all knew what they were planning, and what they were planning did not include me. Grandpa had passed only 10 days earlier. The house still smelled faintly like him, old books, cedar, and the peppermint candies he always carried in his pockets. I loved that smell. It was the smell of safety, of summers spent in his garden, of late-night conversations where he'd tell me stories about his childhood and say, Avery, you listen better than anyone in this family. But apparently listening didn't make me matter. Not at this table. My Uncle Brian was at the head of the table, flipping through folders like he was hosting a corporate board meeting. My Aunt Linda was beside him, adjusting her diamonds as if they were badges of authority. My cousins, Jason and Megan, were whispering about something on Megan's phone. My own mother, soft-spoken and conflict-avoidant, sat toward the middle, staring at her hands. And then there was me. 27 years old. A marketing assistant barely paying rent. Single. Quiet. The one everyone still treated like a teenager because I wasn't loud or domineering like the rest of them. The baby of the family. The one people patted on the head and dismissed. Brian cleared his throat. All right, let's be realistic. Dad didn't leave much behind. The house, the savings, a few investments. Nothing dramatic. We should divide responsibilities logically. Logical. A word people often use when they're about to be unfair. Linda chimed in. And we should keep things simple. We don't want to confuse people. Her eyes flicked toward me when she said, confuse. Jason smirked. Yeah. This isn't kiddie hour. I swallowed hard. I'm not a kid. Megan laughed softly. Sweetheart, no one said you were. We're just saying this stuff is complicated. You wouldn't understand the financial side. Dad and Uncle Brian can walk you through it. I can understand it, I said, though my voice wavered. And Grandpa always told me, Avery, Linda interrupted, your grandfather adored you. We all know that. But affection isn't the same as capability. And then she said it. You're too young to matter here. A slow burn spread through my chest. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leave. But cold silent success isn't born in arguments. It's born in stillness. In patience. In waiting. So I said nothing. The meeting continued without me, as if I were a chair, a lamp, a decorative plant, something in the room but not really part of it. They divided the assets. They made decisions. They took notes. My mother nodded along quietly. At one point, Brian said, the will reading is next week. But we all know what's coming. Dad trusted me with everything. I've managed every major decision for the past 15 years. Linda added, it's obvious he expected you to take over. She smoothed her blouse and said, honestly, the executor announcement will just be a formality. Megan leaned back in her chair. Grandpa wouldn't put someone inexperienced in charge. Jason snorted. Can you imagine if he put Avery in charge? She'd faint. Everyone laughed. I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. The sound wouldn't come out. Inside, something shifted. A quiet click. Like a lock turning. Cold. Calm. Clear. Not the kind of anger that explodes. The kind that freezes. I sat there silently, staring at my hands, thinking, I hope you're all this confident next week. Because they didn't know the things Grandpa told me. The letters he sent. The secrets he whispered in the garden while we picked tomatoes. The nights he'd say, Avery, when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do. They didn't know he'd changed his will the year before. Or that he wanted someone different. Someone quiet. Someone overlooked. Someone who mattered more than they ever realized. They didn't know what was coming. The walk home. My mom and I left together. She didn't speak much, just kept wringing her hands. When we reached the car, she finally whispered, "Avery, don't take what they said personally. They're stressed." I buckled my seatbelt. They weren't stressed. They were confident. She winced. "They're older than you. They think they know more. That doesn't make them right." She sighed but didn't argue. I looked out the window as she drove us home, the world outside blurry and dark. My hands were cold, but my thoughts were sharp. Grandpa always said, silence isn't weakness. It's a waiting place. And I was done feeling weak. The day of the reading, when the day finally came, the family walked into the attorney's office like they were arriving to collect trophies. I walked in quietly behind them. No one asked if I needed help. No one asked if I had questions. They didn't even look at me. I didn't need them to. The attorney, Ms. Morgan, was a crisp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s. She greeted us, then gestured for everyone to sit. Brian sat front and center. Linda right beside him. Jason and Megan flanking them. My mother somewhere in the middle. I sat in the back. Ms. Morgan opened the folder and said, "Let's begin." Brian leaned back confidently, arms crossed, ready for what he believed was already his. Ms. Morgan took out the first page. "Your father," she said, "made significant updates to his estate documents last year. What I am about to read may come as a surprise." Linda's eyebrows shot up. Jason snorted. Ethan smirked. My mother shifted nervously. Ms. Morgan continued. "The executor of the estate, as appointed by your father, is," she paused. And I swear the universe held its breath. She looked directly at me. "Mississippi Avery Lane." Brian's head snapped toward her. Linda gasped. Jason choked on his gum. Megan whispered, "Wait, what?" My mother turned completely around in her seat, eyes wide. And I just sat still. Calm. Cold. Quiet. Exactly the way Grandpa taught me. Ms. Morgan said it again, clearer, "Avery Lane is the executor of this estate. Her name appears first in every legal document. First. Not last. Not optional. Not afterthought. First." The room exploded with disbelief. What? How is that possible? She's a child. This has to be a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was the moment everything cracked. And it was only the beginning. Chaos didn't erupt all at once. It arrived in fragments. A gasp from my aunt. A strangled laugh from Jason. A stunned, "What?" from my mother. And Brian, my uncle, the self-appointed king of the family, leaning forward as if he misheard the entire English language. Ms. Morgan didn't flinch. She folded her hands calmly, the way someone does when they've seen dozens of families break open in the same way. Brian finally found his voice. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" "Of course." Ms. Morgan lifted the document. "Your father named Avery Lane as executor of his estate. She is the sole individual authorized to make final decisions." I watched the color drain from his face. He'd spent decades assuming leadership was his by birthright. By seniority. By ego. And now, all of it evaporated in one sentence. Linda leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "This is outrageous. She's too young. She doesn't understand finances. She doesn't understand property law. That," Ms. Morgan said coolly, "is not for us to decide. This was your father's legal and final wish." My aunt sputtered. But surely he didn't mean it. He must have been confused." Ms. Morgan's voice sharpened a fraction. "He updated the will last year. His mental and physical capacity were professionally documented. His intentions were both clear and legally sound." I felt the shift in the room. They weren't just shocked. They were blindsided. Megan crossed her arms. "Okay, but why Avery? She's the baby. Grandpa always spoiled her." Spoiled. That word always irritated me. People forget that kindness isn't spoiling. Listening isn't spoiling. Being gentle with the gentle isn't spoiling. Brian let out a humorless laugh. "Avery doesn't know anything about property. Dad knew I handled everything. I always handled everything." Ms. Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yes," he snapped. "Bills, maintenance, taxes, then, She said, you should have no problem assisting the executor as needed. But decisions are hers. The heir stiffened. I could feel their eyes drilling into me. Anger. Confusion. Humiliation. I didn't move a muscle. Cold silent success isn't dramatic. It's quiet. Precise. Steady. Ms. Morgan flipped to the next page. Now, regarding the division of property, Brian slammed his palm on the table. Absolutely not. We can't move forward until we understand why she was chosen. The lawyer adjusted her glasses. Your father provided a written statement explaining his decision. I will read it now. A hush dropped like a curtain. My heart thudded once, deep and strong. Ms. Morgan opened a sealed letter, cleared her throat, and began, to my family, if you are hearing this, it means I am no longer there to speak for myself. So I will speak now in writing. Their collective breath tightened. My decision to appoint Avery as the executor of this estate was not made lightly. Nor was it made out of emotion. I made this choice because she listens. She observes. She acts with thought instead of impulse. Jason scoffed. She hardly talks. Ms. Morgan continued without acknowledging him. This family has often mistaken volume for leadership. But leadership requires clarity, calm, patience, and the ability to see beyond one's self. Avery has all of these. Linda muttered under her breath. This is ridiculous. She may be young, but age has never been the measure of responsibility. Character has. Silence. To my eldest children and grandchildren, you have strength, experience, and conviction. But sometimes you do not leave space for anyone else to exist. I hope this decision teaches you to listen as much as you speak. Brian's jaw tightened. Avery will do what is best for the family, without ego or agenda. She has my trust. And I hope, in time, she earns yours. Henry Lane. Ms. Morgan lowered the letter gently. No one spoke. Because for the first time in their lives, they'd been told, explicitly, undeniably, that they were not the chosen ones. I sat still, hands clasped, eyes forward, giving them nothing to interpret. Cold success works best in silence. Brian breaks first. My uncle exhaled hard. No. No. No, this doesn't make sense. Avery, did you know about this? I met his stare. No, did he tell you he was making these changes? No, then how, why, what on earth made him choose you? I didn't answer. Not out of smugness. But because I didn't need to explain something that wasn't mine to justify. Brian's voice cracked with anger. You think you're capable of doing this? I looked at him steadily. I think Grandpa believed I was. He froze. Because that was the truth he couldn't argue with. Linda's meltdown. Linda scoffed. I refuse to accept this. We will contest the will. Ms. Morgan's tone sharpened. You are free to attempt, but the will is airtight. Your father signed with witnesses, with mental competency, with updated medical clearance, and with video confirmation. They all paled. Video? Megan asked. Yes, Ms. Morgan said. He recorded a statement. Legally binding. Unambiguous. Brian swallowed. About her? About everything. My stomach tightened. Cold silence again. The executor clause. Ms. Morgan turned to the next document. Shall we proceed? Brian held up a hand. One more thing. Being executor gives her control over decisions, yes. But we should have equal access to information. Ms. Morgan nodded. Yes. She cannot hide documents or alter anything. Then she looked at me. But she holds final authority. Those words were a knife. Sharp. Precise. Cutting through every smirk they'd ever thrown. I felt the weight of my grandfather's trust settle onto my shoulders. Not heavy. Steady. Megan suddenly asked, so she could decide to sell the house. Or keep it. Or, Ms. Morgan answered plainly. Yes. The executor holds the deciding vote. They all stared at me. The family that said I was too young to matter. Too naive. Too soft. Now staring at the person with all the power. And I didn't say a word. Cold silent success is the loudest kind. The room felt colder after Ms. Morgan finished reading the executor clause. Colder, but clearer. Like fog lifting off a field, revealing everything beneath it, every contour, every truth, every insecurity that had been hiding behind noise. My family had always occupied space in the loudest way possible, filling rooms with opinions, overtalking each other, overtalking me. But now, everything in that office was silent. And it wasn't because I demanded it. It was because they suddenly realized I didn't have to. Brian cleared his throat, trying to recover some dignity. Okay, he said, exhaling sharply, fine. If this is how Dad wanted it, we'll follow the process. But Avery, you need to understand, this is not simple. There are taxes, valuations, debts, investments. He was doing it again. Explaining life to me like I was a child. Like Grandpa's letter was a glitch in the system instead of a deliberate choice. I folded my hands on my lap. I'm aware. Brian blinked. Aware of what? How estates work. Linda scoffed. Where on earth would you learn something like that? I lifted my gaze calmly. From Grandpa. That shut her up. She stared at me like I had spoken another language. He taught you. He said I should understand how things work, I said, voice calm and even. He didn't think financial literacy should be a privilege handed only to the loudest person in the room. Ms. Morgan smiled faintly, the first hint of approval I'd seen from her. My family grew visibly uncomfortable. Good. Understanding my grandfather's plan, Ms. Morgan tapped her pen lightly on the table. Shall we proceed to the division of property? Everyone nodded stiffly except me. I simply waited. She lifted the will. The primary property, Mr. Lane's home, will be transferred to another pause. Another breathless second. She looked directly at me again. Mississippi Avery Lane. Linda gasped. Megan muttered, of course. Jason swore under his breath. Brian whispered, impossible. I felt a tightness in my chest, not fear, not joy, something quieter. Something deeper. Grandpa always said the house was more than walls and a roof. It's history, he'd tell me. You protect history by giving it to the right hands, not the loudest ones. Linda snapped, why would he give her the house? She barely lived here. She barely visited. That hit a nerve, but before I could respond, Ms. Morgan spoke first. Your father addressed that. She flipped to another page. Your father addressed that. My heart thudded. Of course he did. She read aloud, the house goes to Avery because she sees the difference between value and possession. She understands memory. She understands intention. She understands me. This is not about real estate. It is about legacy. No one knew where to look. No one knew what to say. And I simply breathed. Cold silent success is a blade wrapped in silk. Soft in delivery. Sharp in effect. The investment funds, Ms. Morgan continued, next, the investment portfolio. Brian straightened, expecting his name. She read, primary beneficiary, Avery Lane. My uncle went pale. Linda sputtered, what? Why would he? Ms. Morgan continued firmly, secondary beneficiaries, Brian Lane and Linda Hopkins, split at 15% each. The math settled in. Slowly. Painfully. Avery, 70%. Them, 15 and 15. I wasn't expecting that. I knew Grandpa trusted me, but I didn't know he trusted me that much. Brian slammed his hands on the table. He must have been confused. He must, this is not rational. Ms. Morgan lifted the video file from the folder. Would you prefer the video confirmation? The room froze. Brian sank back into his chair. Defeated. Their anger turning into fear, and that's when it happened. The shift. Their frustration turned into something else entirely, fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being wrong. Fear of what it meant that the person they dismissed now held everything. Linda pointed at me dramatically. You're going to ruin everything. You don't know how to manage this kind of money. I tilted my head. You seem very concerned about what I will do with my inheritance. Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't expect me to say that. She didn't expect me to be calm. Or confident. Or collected. She didn't expect me at all. My turn to speak, I leaned forward, my voice still soft but carrying the weight of finally taking up space. I'm not here to fight you, I said. I'm here to honor Grandpa. Linda scoffed. Honor him? You didn't even visit enough to know what he wanted. Yes, I said, steady. I did. Brian jabbed a finger toward me. And what gives you the right to say that? I exhaled. Then I said it. Because I was the last person he spoke to before he updated his will. Silence. Deep. Complete. They stared at me like the ground beneath them hadn't just shifted, it had vanished. My grandfather trusted me, I continued, not because I was loud, or experienced, or older. He trusted me because I listened. Because he didn't have to perform around me. Because he didn't feel judged. Their faces twisted with something between resentment and realization. I sat back quietly. I'm not here to prove myself to you, I said. Grandpa already decided. And then I stopped talking. Because cold silent success isn't about shouting. It's about knowing you don't have to. The attorney finishes the will. Ms. Morgan finalized the documents. All that remains is distributing the remaining personal items. But no one asked questions anymore. No one protested. No one dared. Not because they respected me yet. But because they were stunned. And nothing is more powerful than quiet confidence in a room full of people who underestimated you. Leaving the office when it was over, I stood. Everyone else stayed seated, as if getting up would somehow confirm their loss. As I walked to the door, Brian said quietly, Avery, wait. I stopped, but didn't turn around. His voice cracked. What do we do now? I finally looked back. You follow my lead, I said softly. No arrogance. No cruelty. Just truth. And I'll do right by Grandpa. That's the only thing that matters. He nodded, defeated. Linda stared away. Megan kicked the carpet. Jason hid behind his phone. My mother watched me with shock, and something like pride. And then I walked out the door, the executor they never expected. The one they said was too young to matter. The one who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. The air outside the attorney's office felt different. Lighter. Colder. Sharper. My chest rose and fell slowly, as if my lungs were finally remembering how to breathe. I hadn't won a battle. I hadn't defeated anyone. I had simply stepped into a role my grandfather believed was mine. The executor. The one with the final say. The one they dismissed until they couldn't. My family filed out minutes later, each one avoiding my eyes like I was a flame they weren't ready to touch. The quiet among them wasn't peaceful. It was stunned. Heavy. Thick with bruised egos. My Uncle Brian approached first. He stopped a few feet away, hands stuffed awkwardly into his pockets. Avery, he said, voice low, I just want to make sure, you understand what being executor means. There it was again. The instinct to dictate. To guide. To control. Old habits die hard in people who've never been challenged. I met his eyes, calm. Yes. I understand. He blinked, surprised that I didn't ask him to explain. Well, okay. I guess you'll call me if you have questions. I nodded politely. If I need input, I'll reach out. He shifted his weight, the reality hitting him, she doesn't need me. Behind him, Linda whispered something sharp to Megan, who whispered it to Jason, who shook his head and muttered something back. Their whole dynamic was changing right in front of them. And they hated it. My mother falls into step beside me as everyone scattered toward their cars. My mother finally approached. She looked at me the way someone looks at a painting they've seen 100 times but somehow missed the most important detail. Why didn't you tell me? She asked softly. Because Grandpa didn't want me to, I said. He said people listen differently when they think you're small. She nodded slowly. Her eyes glistened. You're not small, she whispered. It was the first time she'd said something like that to me. The words wrapped around my ribs like warmth. I know, I said gently. I'm starting to. She took my hand. Your grandfather was, very wise. He was, I whispered, and very intentional. She exhaled through her nose, eyes drifting across the parking lot to where Brian was pacing and swearing under his breath. This won't be easy. I don't need easy, I said. Just possible. And she squeezed my hand tighter. The first family meeting under my lead 2 days later, I called our first estate meeting. Not a suggestion. A requirement. The house needed evaluation. The accounts needed review. The debts needed clarification. Everything needed organization. And I, the too young one, the quiet one, was the only person who could sign off on anything. We met at Grandpa's house. The driveway was full. The porch light flickered, just like it always had. But inside, the shift was unmistakable. They sat at the dining table waiting for me. Megan looked annoyed. Jason looked bored. Linda looked furious. Brian looked humbled. My mother fluffed a couch cushion nervously. I walked in with a folder tucked under my arm and placed it on the table. Brian leaned forward. So what's the plan? I'll outline it, I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. Grandpa's seat. Everyone stiffened. I didn't sit there to provoke them. I sat there because the executor sits at the head. And I was the executor. The goal, I began, is to handle everything efficiently and respectfully. Grandpa was clear. He wanted transparency. Accountability. Zero drama. Jason snorted, too late. I ignored him. We'll start with the house. I opened the folder. I've arranged for an appraiser to evaluate it on Friday. Linda scoffed. An appraiser you hired? I locked eyes with her. Yes. She opened her mouth to argue. I kept my voice steady. If you don't trust my judgment, feel free to hire your own appraiser. But mine is the only one whose valuation I will legally consider. Linda froze. Cold silence. Sharp. Precise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply enforced the boundary. Brian cleared his throat. Okay, that's fine. And, the accounts? I've already reviewed them with Ms. Morgan, I said. She'll send everyone copies. Linda frowned. You reviewed them without us? Yes, I replied, as executor. Brian lifted a hand. Let's not turn this into a fight. I nodded. Agreed. That's why we're doing everything by the book. The call that changed everything, then my phone buzzed. It was Ms. Morgan. Important. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Hello. Her voice was calm. Avery, I have the investment statements. They arrived earlier than expected. Good. And there's something else. I paused. What is it? Your grandfather also left you his private correspondence. Letters. Journals. Notes. He wanted you to have them before final distribution. My chest tightened. Why me? Because, she said softly, he believed you were the only one who would understand him. I swallowed. And the others? They'll get the remainder of the estate. But the personal pieces were meant for you alone. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about money. Or power. Or winning. It was about legacy. Understanding. Connection. Thank you, I whispered. When I returned to the dining room, they all stared at me expectantly. I sat down, folded my hands, and said simply, we'll continue. But inside? Inside I knew the balance had shifted completely. They used to speak over me. Now they measured every word around me. Not because I demanded respect. But because I embodied it. A hard conversation finally happens. The meeting lasted an hour. It was tense, but controlled. Everyone contributed, but for once, no one tried to dominate. After it ended, Brian lingered. He looked uncomfortable, like an apology was trying to break through years of pride. Avery, he said quietly, I never realized how much Dad trusted you. I held his gaze. Trust isn't loud. He nodded slowly. No. I suppose it's not. A long silence stretched. I'm willing to help, he said. Just, tell me where you need me. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I just nodded once. Cold silent success doesn't need warmth to work. It needs clarity. And clarity was here. A private moment with Grandpa that evening, I opened the box Ms. Morgan gave me. His handwriting covered page after page. Thoughts. Stories. Memories. Regrets. Advice. And at the top of one page, in writing shakier than I remembered, he had written, Avery, the world underestimates the quiet ones. Change that. Start with this family. My throat tightened. That's exactly what I was doing. Not by yelling. Not by proving. Not by fighting. But by simply stepping into the space he left for me. A space no one else even saw. A space built for someone like me. Someone who listens. Someone who observes. Someone who stays steady when the room shakes. Someone who mattered all along. The biggest surprise about power is how quiet it feels. Not loud. Not dramatic. Not something that rushes through your veins like adrenaline. Power, real power, settles. It sits in your bones like certainty. It tells you, without noise, you don't have to prove anything. And for the first time in my life, I felt that. The final family meeting 3 weeks after the will reading, Ms. Morgan scheduled the final estate meeting. The house was fully appraised, the investments evaluated, the debts catalogued, and the assets prepared for distribution. Everyone arrived tense. Brian entered stiffly. Linda wore her signature jewelry like armor. Jason scrolled on his phone. Megan avoided my eyes. My mother sat quietly beside me. No one said anything cruel this time. No one smirked. No one dismissed me. Cold silent success restructured the room without a single word. Ms. Morgan called us to order. We're finalizing today. Avery, as executor, you'll lead. Each one of them flinched. Not dramatically. Just enough to show they still weren't used to it. I began, steady, calm, and in control. The property is retained under my name, I said evenly. I will maintain the house. Brian nodded slowly. Understood. There was no fight. No resistance. Just acceptance. The investment portfolio, I continued, will be distributed as outlined. You each receive your portions. Expect funds within the week. Even Linda didn't argue. She wanted to. Her jaw was tight. Her fingers dug into her armrest. Her throat moved as she swallowed back words. But she stayed silent. They all stayed silent. Because what can you argue with when the law, the will, and the deceased's own words have already spoken louder than any of them? The last document. Ms. Morgan handed me a sealed envelope. This was your grandfather's final letter, she said softly. He asked that you read it after the estate was settled. My heart felt heavy. My family watched, not with entitlement this time, but with something closer to humility. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. I read it quietly first. Then, without being asked, I lifted my head and read it aloud. Avery, if you're reading this, then everything has come full circle. I know this was not easy for you. I know you carry silence like a shield, and I know it has been used against you. But I want you to understand something. Silence is not weakness. Silence is precision. Silence is control. You will lead this family. Not by force. Not by fear. But by being the only one who truly listens. When they speak, hear their pain. When they rage, hear their fear. When they belittle you, hear their insecurity. And when they finally learn to hear you, you'll know my choice was right. I lowered the letter. The room felt different. Softened. Shifted. Linda wiped a tear from her cheek before quickly looking away. Jason stared at the floor, jaw tight. Megan blinked rapidly, as if trying not to cry. Brian closed his eyes for a long moment, then nodded slowly, accepting what he should have seen long ago. My mother gently touched my arm, whispering, he was right about you. And for once, I believed it. The quietest turning point after the meeting, Brian came to me outside. He hesitated, something he never did before, and said, Avery, you handled this better than I could have. I nodded gratefully, but didn't say anything. He continued, Dad trusted you for a reason. I see that now. Again, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He swallowed hard. If you ever need help, I'm here. But I know I'm not in charge anymore. Something warm tugged at my chest, not victory, not triumph, just clarity. You're still family, I said. And I want to work together. Relief flooded his eyes. Years of unspoken tension dissolved in one quiet moment. What cold silent success really means. Cold revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It doesn't require shouting or bragging. It's letting people watch you become everything they said you could never be. It's watching them choke on their own certainty. It's letting the truth walk into the room before you do, and speak louder than you ever could. My family didn't forget what they said to me. They didn't forget how they treated me. But they had to face the reality that the person they dismissed, the person they underestimated, became the anchor of the entire estate. Not through anger. Not through fighting. Not through proving myself. Just through being exactly the person my grandfather believed I was: quiet, steady, strong, capable. The kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. The final scene, back at the house that evening, I went to Grandpa's house alone. The sun was setting, casting soft shadows across the porch. The wind chime he made out of spoons clinked lazily in the breeze. I unlocked the door he wanted only me to open. Inside, the air felt still. Sacred. I walked to his old armchair, sat down, and rested the letter on my lap. Thank you, I whispered into the quiet. For trusting me. For choosing me. For seeing me. When the rest of them didn't. The house hummed with old memories, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like home. My home. Not because they said I deserved nothing, but because Grandpa said I deserved everything they overlooked. And that was the coldest revenge of all, not slamming doors. Not telling them off. Not winning a fight. Just outgrowing every version of me they ever imagined. Silently.